Welcome to Revenge Report. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more. Let's dive in. I stepped into the ballroom and immediately felt like a fish out of water. The air was thick with forced laughter and the sharp clinking of wine glasses. The familiar faces of my high school classmates had aged, some better than others, but they were all unmistakable. Everyone was still playing the same game, boasting, posturing, proving something I didn't care about anymore. I barely recognized half of them, but they sure seemed to recognize me. Mia, the queen bee of high school, was the first to lock eyes with me. She was flanked by a group of former friends, laughing a little too loudly. Her eyes narrowed when she saw me, and I knew exactly what was coming. "Well, well, look who decided to show up," she said, her voice a little too sweet. "I thought you'd still be at home, tinkering with that failed little startup of yours. Or wait, did you ever get a real job?" The jab stung, but I didn't let it show. I gave her a tight smile, something that might have once passed as friendly. "No, Mia," I said calmly. "I'm doing just fine, actually." She tilted her head, taking in my simple black dress, the one I'd thrown on after realizing I'd misplaced my original outfit and had to settle for what I had in my closet. Her lips curled into a smirk. "Right. Well, it's good to see you're still trying." Before I could answer, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I checked it discreetly, 5 missed calls from my assistant and a message from my publicist hinting at something big. My gut twisted. I glanced up at Mia, who was now busy with someone else, then debated whether I should just leave. But no, I couldn't. Not yet. Not without something to show for this night. I stayed, feeling the weight of those missed calls, the unspoken expectations, and my own frustration boiling beneath the surface. One night. That's all I was asking for. One night where I could feel seen. I stood there in the ballroom, still holding my phone, the weight of those missed calls pressing against me. I could feel Mia's words echoing in the back of my mind, cutting deeper than they should have. But the sting wasn't new. It was something I'd learned to live with, something I had expected from the moment I launched my first startup. That girl, the one I used to be, eager, wide-eyed, convinced she was going to change the world, was a distant memory. I remembered how it felt when I first left college, full of ambition, ready to take on everything. I had a vision. I had the drive. I thought all the right moves would fall into place. I thought I was untouchable, but I was wrong. The health tech startup I'd poured my heart into had started out with such promise. Investors were interested. The press was all over us. I thought, this is it. We were going to disrupt the industry to bring real innovation to healthcare. But the reality, the pressure, the lack of direction. I made mistakes, so many mistakes. I hired too fast. I ignored the warning signs. I burned through cash without a clear plan. I kept pushing, hoping things would fall into place, but they never did. By the time it all fell apart, I was back in my parents' house, sitting in that old room with the faded posters on the walls, trying to figure out what went wrong. My inbox was full of rejection letters, and my phone never stopped buzzing with people telling me it was over. My failure was loud. People were talking. Mia called me during that time more than once to check in, or so she said. But it wasn't really a check-in. It was her taking the opportunity to kick me while I was down. "I always knew you weren't cut out for this," she'd said, laughing. "I mean, did you really think you could make a dent in an industry like that? Come on. You were always just pretending." She wasn't the only one. Everyone had an opinion. I'd run into people at the grocery store or at family gatherings, and they'd offer their unsolicited advice, their sympathetic smiles, as though I needed their pity. "What happened to that startup of yours? I thought you had it all figured out," some old acquaintance would say, eyes widening as if they couldn't believe I'd failed. And I hated it. I hated the way they looked at me, like I was some kind of walking failure. I hated the way their pity stung more than their judgment. But I didn't let them see that. I kept my chin up, smiled when I had to, even though I wanted to scream. And yet none of that stopped me. I could have walked away from tech altogether, let the past define me. I could have taken any of those offers to just consult and slid into a corporate job, hiding from what I really wanted to do. But I didn't. I quietly started building again. This time, I kept it all under wraps. I didn't need the applause. I didn't need validation. I didn't even need anyone's approval. My new project, my real project, was bigger than any of the failed plans before it. This one had a purpose that wasn't just about me. I shifted my focus from health tech to something that felt more urgent, more real: sustainable energy solutions. For years, I worked on it, late nights and long weekends, away from the prying eyes of the world. I developed tech that could revolutionize how we use energy, focusing on clean, affordable solutions that could actually make a difference. I wasn't chasing quick fame or startup glory anymore. This time, I wasn't going to fall into the same trap. I wasn't out to prove anything to anyone. The funny part? I didn't need anyone to see me working this time. No more flashy press releases, no more big launches. I wasn't looking for applause or praise. I was focused on making something that mattered, something sustainable that could change the world. I'd kept it under wraps, and I was okay with that. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was doing the work, the real work, and it was starting to pay off. But nobody knew yet. Not Mia, not anyone in this room. And I plan to keep it that way, at least for now. But the clock was ticking, and that phone of mine had a few more things to say. The world would know soon enough. I was still processing Mia's jab when I felt a hand clap down on my shoulder. I turned, expecting to see someone else from high school who I barely remembered. Instead, it was Nick. He was the same, clean-shaven, perfectly styled hair, that too confident smile. The guy who'd been the object of every girl's attention back then, including mine. I tried not to flinch when he leaned in. "Hey, look who it is," Nick said, his voice casual, almost too casual. "How have you been?" I forced a smile, feeling the weight of his gaze. "I'm good," I replied, trying to sound relaxed. He raised an eyebrow, scanning me like he was searching for some sign of success or failure, whichever one would make for a more interesting story. "Yeah? What's keeping you busy these days?" His tone implied that I probably didn't have much going on. "Just consulting," I said, keeping it vague. He didn't need to know the specifics. The last thing I needed was him looking down on me even more than he already was. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to piece together a story in his head. "Consulting. Right. So, still figuring it out, huh?" My jaw clenched. Still figuring it out. I had to fight the urge to snap, but I couldn't. I wasn't here to get into it with him. Not yet, anyway. "Something like that," I muttered, doing my best to keep the edge out of my voice. Nick didn't seem to notice, or didn't care. He leaned back, checking out the crowd behind me, and then turned his attention back to me. "You know, you've got a lot of potential, but it's been a while. If you ever want to get back into something serious, I'm sure my company could use someone like you." I raised an eyebrow. "Your company?" "Yeah, we're growing. And honestly, we're always looking for good people to help out." He gave a little chuckle, like he was doing me a huge favor. "You could work under me for a bit, get your feet back under you. We have a solid team. Think it might be a good fit?" A solid team? I fought to keep the sarcasm from spilling out. He was offering me a job like I was some kind of charity case. His tone was all pity wrapped up in professional speak. I stared at him for a beat, trying to read his intentions. I knew how this would go. He'd offer me a position to make himself feel good, to be the guy who helped the underdog. But in reality, he probably couldn't care less about what I was doing or where I was at. It was just another way to remind me of the gap between where I was and where he thought I should be. I forced a smile, even though I could feel my blood starting to boil. "I'll keep that in mind. Thanks." He gave me a knowing nod, as if I'd just told him I'd be taking the job in the next week. "No problem. Just let me know. I can make things happen." I could already feel the frustration building in my chest, but I knew I couldn't let him see it. I had more important things to focus on. I glanced at my phone again. Still no word from my assistant, but that message from the publicist was still fresh in my mind. Something was about to happen, something that would turn all of this on its head. As tempting as it was to walk out of there, to leave the past behind and forget the whole night, I couldn't. Not yet. I had something bigger to prove than just proving Nick wrong. I had something that would change everything. And I was going to see this through. "Good seeing you, Nick," I said, giving him a tight smile. I turned away before he could say anything else. I wasn't sticking around for his charity. I was sticking around for the moment I'd earned. The host, a guy I barely recognized from high school, stepped up to the microphone, his voice bouncing off the walls. The lights dimmed slightly, and a hush fell over the crowd. It was time for the superlative awards, and I could already feel the tension thickening in the air. "So, let's get this started," he said, sounding way too cheerful for the mood. "The first award of the night goes to someone who, made a real impression on all of us back in the day. It's the least successful award." He smiled too widely, and I could already tell where this was going. A few awkward chuckles rippled through the crowd. I could feel my pulse quicken as he flipped through his notes, pretending like he didn't already know who he was about to call up. And the winner is Sarah Mitchell. I froze for a second. My heart sank. The room felt like it was closing in on me. My name hung in the air like some kind of cruel joke. I'd almost forgotten about the rumor mill, about the way people had written me off after my startup collapsed. But here it was, all laid out. A public reminder of everything I'd been through and failed at. I stood up, trying to force my legs to move. I walked to the stage slowly, fighting the hot rush of humiliation in my chest. As I walked past the tables, I could feel the eyes on me, some curious, others judgmental. The claps were polite, but you could hear the hesitation, the lack of genuine enthusiasm. I was the punchline, the story everyone loved to retell. I took the microphone from the host, forcing a smile. "Well, thank you," I said, trying to make it sound genuine. "I guess it's nice to know I've made an impression. Of some kind." The crowd gave a few scattered chuckles, and I could tell the tone had shifted. They didn't know how to react. I didn't blame them. I took the award, a tiny, unimpressive trophy that felt heavier than it should have. The walk back to my seat was torture. I could feel the weight of every eye, the sting of their whispers. When I finally sat down, I didn't even look at the people around me. I kept my eyes glued to my phone, hoping I could disappear into the screen for a minute. But then, as I swiped through the notifications, a call came in from an unfamiliar number. The name on the screen made my heart skip. The Wall Street Review. I felt a jolt of panic, then excitement, then something else, something I couldn't quite place. I glanced around. The room was still buzzing, people distracted by the awkwardness of the moment, but it felt like everything was suddenly moving in slow motion. I pressed the phone to my ear, the mic in my other hand hanging by my side. "Hello? Hi, is this Sarah Mitchell?" A woman's voice asked on the other end. "This is she." "This is Elaine, from the Wall Street Review. We've been reviewing your company's recent developments, and we've just confirmed something that I think you'll want to hear." She paused. "We're valuing your company at $5 billion. I almost didn't process the words. The room seemed to blur, the sounds around me fading away. 5 billion. The number bounced in my mind like a crazy echo. I took a steadying breath, keeping my voice calm as I spoke. "That's fantastic," I said, my mind racing. "I'm glad to hear it." I looked up, meeting the eyes of a few classmates who were still glancing over. Then I saw Mia and Nick. Mia's face was frozen, disbelief washing over her. Nick's eyes were wide, and I could almost see the gears turning in his head as he processed what he was hearing. I felt a strange kind of peace as I realized they were about to hear it too. "Actually," I continued, not caring anymore that I was still holding the microphone, "I've been running a sustainable energy company in secret for the past few years. We've been working on tech that could revolutionize energy consumption." The words hit the room with a thud. The crowd quieted, the noise in the background dying to a muffled hum. I glanced around, seeing faces shift from disbelief to curiosity. A few people leaned in, and I could almost feel the collective inhale as the weight of what I was saying sank in. I wasn't the failure anymore. I wasn't the girl everyone felt sorry for. I had built something real, something big. And they were hearing about it for the first time. I looked at Mia and Nick again. Mia's face was a mix of surprise and discomfort, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't quite find the words. Nick, on the other hand, was staring at me like he'd just seen a ghost, his lips twitching as if he was about to speak, but didn't know how. I gave a small smile, letting the silence stretch for a moment. This was my moment. I wasn't going to let them see me sweat. "Thanks," I said to Elaine, trying to wrap up the call. "I'll be in touch with my team. Appreciate the update." I ended the call and set the phone down, still holding that God-forsaken trophy in my hand. The room was dead quiet now. Nobody knew what to say. I finally broke the silence with a simple, "Well, that's all for me. Thanks for the award, everyone." I didn't need to say anything else. The look on their faces told me everything. I stepped out of the ballroom, the cool air hitting me like a wave. I felt light, almost weightless, the weight of everything I'd been holding on to suddenly shifting. But before I could take a full breath, my phone started ringing again. First, it was my assistant, and then it was the Wall Street Review, the number I'd just hung up on. I swiped it, not caring to look at the screen. "Hello? It's Elaine again. Sorry to bother you, but we're getting a lot of calls about your company. Can we schedule an interview?" I hesitated for half a second before I realized I didn't really have a choice anymore. I'd made my bed, and right now, that bed was in the spotlight. "Yeah, sure," I said, rubbing my temples. "What do you need?" We'd love to hear more about your decision to keep things under wraps. Most people in your position would have been shouting from the rooftops, but you've stayed pretty quiet. Why is that? I took a deep breath. Why did I keep it quiet? The truth was, I didn't want to get caught up in the game. After everything with the health tech startup, I didn't trust the hype anymore. I wasn't looking for a fast rise to the top. I wanted to build something solid, something that would last. But saying that to a reporter would sound too idealistic, too naive. I wasn't focused on the attention, I said carefully. I wanted to focus on developing the product, not on the noise. I've seen how easy it is to get distracted by the media circus. I didn't need validation. I needed results. There was a slight pause on the other end of the line before Elaine responded, her tone sharp and professional. A lot of people are going to be asking why you waited this long to come forward. What's your strategy now? I glanced around the parking lot as if the quiet might ground me, but everything felt surreal. My strategy has always been about the long game. Building a sustainable energy solution is not something you do overnight, and I wasn't about to jump on some flashy bandwagon. I stayed quiet because it was never about the applause. It's about the impact. Elaine's voice softened a bit. So you're saying this is just the beginning? I could hear the hunger in her voice, the same hunger I knew the rest of the media would have soon. The floodgates were open now. Exactly, I said, my voice steady. It's just the beginning. There's a lot more to come. I hung up a few minutes later, the weight of what I'd just said sinking in. I wasn't just an entrepreneur anymore. I wasn't just a failed techie who'd clawed her way out of a disaster. I was the face of something bigger now. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed again, and again, and again. News outlets, journalists, former classmates now sending messages of congratulations. The media storm was already beginning, and the pressure was mounting. I slid into the car, staring at my phone screen, watching the notifications pile up. People were asking how it felt to be the new face of the sustainable energy movement, how it felt to be the underdog turned success story. I didn't want to answer them. I didn't care about the headlines, the tweets, or the interviews. I wasn't doing this for the recognition, but I couldn't avoid the inevitable. The spotlight was on me now, and it wasn't just about my product anymore. It was about me. The realization hit hard. They wanted the story. They wanted the drama. I exhaled slowly, feeling a wave of exhaustion flood over me. All I wanted was to keep working, to keep building. I didn't want this noise. I didn't want the press conferences or the celebrity interviews. I wanted to focus on what mattered: sustainable energy, real change. But how could I keep that focus with all this pressure? I scrolled through some of the messages, and sure enough, there was Nick's name. A half-hearted congratulations, followed by a thinly veiled suggestion to catch up soon. I clicked it away. I didn't need to hear from him now. I didn't need anyone's validation. The phone buzzed again, but this time it was from my publicist. Hey, we're scheduling interviews with Time and Forbes for next week. You ready for this? I closed my eyes for a second. I'm ready, I said, but my voice didn't match the words. Just make sure we stay focused on the mission, not the noise. That's the story. She paused for a second. Got it, Sarah. But the noise is going to be hard to ignore now. Yeah, I muttered, glancing out the window, as the world seemed to spin a little faster around me. I know. I hung up and sat there for a moment, hands resting on the steering wheel. The car was silent, and for the first time tonight, I didn't feel the need to keep up appearances. I had just taken my first steps into something huge, and now the whole world wanted in. I was proud, yes, but I was also overwhelmed. And as much as I wanted to take the easy route, as much as I wanted to retreat into the shadows and keep working in peace, I knew that wasn't an option anymore. I had built something real, something that could change the future. And no matter how much the noise got louder, I couldn't let it pull me off course. I was halfway to the exit when I felt someone grab my arm. I turned, expecting another well-meaning former classmate, but it was Mia. Her face was flushed, her eyes burning with something I couldn't place. Anger, maybe. So, this is what you've been hiding? She asked, her voice sharp, cutting through the buzz of the room. I raised an eyebrow. What's the problem, Mia? You never said a word about any of this. Not a word. Not even when we were catching up. She stepped in closer, her voice dropping lower, like she was trying to make sure no one else could hear. You used us. All of us. You were researching us. That's why you came to the reunion, right? To get the story for your big secret project? I blinked, surprised at the venom in her words. That's not what this is about, Mia. I didn't come here to research anyone. I didn't need your approval or anyone else's. She shook her head, her mouth curling into something bitter. You're phony, Sarah. You always were. Too good for everyone, always pretending like you had some grand plan when you were really just failing. You make all this noise now, act like you've got it all figured out, but you didn't even bother to tell anyone what you were working on. Her voice broke on the last word, like she was hurt by my secrecy. I wasn't sure where all of this was coming from, but it was starting to feel personal. I kept my tone steady, refusing to let her rattle me. You think I'm phony? I asked, my voice low but firm. What? Because I didn't broadcast every step I took? You know what? I wasn't hiding anything. I was working. I was building something that actually mattered, and I didn't need a damn audience for it. Mia's eyes flared. You should have trusted us. We were your friends. Don't make this about that, I snapped, the frustration slipping into my voice despite myself. You never trusted me. Not after the startup tanked. You never saw me as anything but the girl who failed. I didn't need validation, Mia. I needed to do the work. She opened her mouth to say something, but I didn't wait for it. I turned, starting to walk away, but I heard a familiar voice cut through the air. Hey, hold on. It was Nick, of course. He appeared by my side, looking like he'd just stepped out of a magazine cover. He glanced between Mia and me, an insincere smile on his face. Mia's right. You know, I thought you were smarter than this, Sarah. I don't get it. You could have let us in, helped us understand what you were up to, but instead, you just kept us all in the dark. It feels cold, you know? I stared at him, the fake concern written all over his face. You're apologizing to Mia now? I asked, voice sharp. Is that what this is about? Nick cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. I mean, look, I'm not saying you owe anyone an explanation, but you could have at least told us you were doing something important. His voice had that condescending edge again, as if he thought he was helping me by offering his support. I clenched my jaw. I don't owe anyone anything, Nick. You think you have me figured out, but you don't. You never have. Mia huffed, crossing her arms. You've always been too good for us, haven't you? All that success now, and you act like you're better than everyone else. I took a step closer to her, my voice steady but biting. Better? Number. I'm not better than anyone. I'm just finally doing something I believe in. Something real. I paused, feeling the weight of what I was about to say. And frankly, being underestimated for so long helped me get here. If you'd all seen me as the failure, maybe I could have stayed focused without all the noise. That's what I needed. Quiet, space, and time to build. I didn't need any of your approval then, and I don't need it now. Mia opened her mouth to retort, but her words faltered when she saw the look in my eyes. Nick, too, seemed to shrink back, realizing I wasn't going to give them the reaction they were hoping for. They didn't get it, and I didn't care if they ever did. For a moment, none of us said anything. The tension between us felt like an invisible wall, heavy and thick. I could tell they wanted to keep pushing, to somehow make me feel small again, but I wasn't that person anymore. I wasn't going to apologize for not needing their validation. You think you have it all figured out, Mia spat, but you don't. You're just pretending. No, I said quietly, my voice low but resolute. I'm not pretending. I'm just doing the work. I turned on my heel, not waiting for either of them to say another word. I didn't need to explain myself anymore. The work would speak for itself. I was still processing the fallout from the reunion when my assistant Lisa called. Her voice was businesslike, but with an undertone of excitement. Sarah, you've got a meeting scheduled with the investors in Silicon Valley. They're interested in a controlling share of the company. I blinked at the message on my phone. I hadn't expected this meeting to come so soon. The numbers, the potential, 5 billion, had barely registered, but now it was all suddenly real. My heart was beating faster than usual, but my head was clear. I had worked for years on this project, and the idea of someone else taking over, of losing control, felt off. But I also knew that to grow, to reach the scale I wanted, this was the kind of deal I needed. Okay, I said, already feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on me. Set it up. Let's see what they have to offer. The flight to Silicon Valley was quiet, too quiet. Lisa and I sat in the back of the plane, me staring out the window, trying to untangle my thoughts. The excitement of the media buzz, the attention, it was all just noise. What mattered, what had always mattered, was the work. I had built this thing, this company, brick by brick. I didn't want to hand it over to anyone just because the numbers looked good. I thought about my old startup, how easy it had been to get swept up in the rush, in the validation, in the success that never truly meant anything. I hadn't made that mistake again. I'd kept things quiet, worked on the tech, stayed in the background. This time, I was doing it right. This time, I wasn't looking for someone else's approval, not even their money. What I wanted was impact. I wanted to change the way the world used energy, not just make a quick buck. By the time we landed, I had decided. Whatever these investors said, I wasn't going to sell out. The meeting took place in one of those sleek glass buildings that screamed money. Big, empty lobbies, polished floors, and the scent of ambition in the air. I could already feel the pressure pushing in, but I kept my focus. They were already seated when we arrived, 3 of them, all wearing the same corporate armor. Dark suits, sharp ties, and that I've seen it all look. They smiled when I walked in, like they were meeting a new project, a shiny opportunity to add to their portfolio. Sarah, the lead investor, Richard, greeted me, his handshake firm. We're really glad you could make it. We've been following your progress, and we think you're sitting on something massive. I nodded, trying not to let the flattery get to me. Thank you, but I know where we stand. I've heard the numbers. Lisa sat across from me, hands folded. She had the same look in her eyes I did, an unreadable mix of curiosity and skepticism. Richard went on, So, here's the deal. We're prepared to offer a significant investment in exchange for a controlling share in the company. We can take you global, Sarah, scale faster than you ever thought possible. With our backing, you'll be able to hit milestones you never imagined. The other 2 investors chimed in, nodding along, their eyes glinting with promise. Bigger teams, more resources, more recognition. It was all there. The kind of deal that could push my company from a small player to a global leader overnight. But I wasn't interested in overnight. Thanks for the offer, I said, my voice steady. But that's not the kind of growth I'm looking for. Richard blinked, clearly thrown by my response. I don't think you understand, Sarah. This is your shot to make it big. We're offering you power, influence. You'll never have to worry about capital again. You'll have the resources to make your vision a reality, on a scale you can't even imagine. I leaned forward, my elbows on the table, meeting their gaze one by one. I understand exactly what you're offering, I said, calm but firm. But I didn't build this company to be part of a corporate empire. I built it because I believe in the product, in what we're doing. And I'm not willing to sell control just for the chance to expand. Their faces hardened, just a little. Richard exchanged a look with the others, his smile faltering. So you're telling us you'd rather stay small? You'd rather limit the impact you could have? No, I said, shaking my head. I'm telling you that I'm not selling my soul for quick success. I want to scale in a way that aligns with my values. That means holding on to control. That means making sure we grow in the right direction, not just the fastest direction. The tension in the room was palpable. They were clearly surprised, maybe even annoyed. But I held my ground. I wasn't about to let them intimidate me into a decision I didn't believe in. Richard's expression tightened, but he nodded. You're a rare one, Sarah. I'll give you that. Most people would have jumped at this deal. I'm not most people, I replied, keeping my voice level. I don't need your money if it means losing the vision I have for this company. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, finally, Richard stood, offering me a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Well, we respect your decision, but know this. If you ever change your mind, the offer stands. You're building something incredible. Don't forget that. I stood too, extending my hand. I won't. Thank you for your time. As I walked out of that room, the weight of the decision still hung in the air. But there was something else, something lighter. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I was doing this my way. No shortcuts, no compromises. And that, for the first time, felt like real success. I was sitting by the bar, nursing a glass of water, trying to block out the lingering tension from the meeting. My mind kept returning to the decision I'd made, my decision. The more I thought about it, the clearer it became that walking away from those investors was the right call. But just as I was starting to feel settled in my thoughts, I felt a tap on my shoulder. Sarah? I turned, half expecting it to be another journalist or some well-meaning former classmate with an awkward congratulations. Instead, it was a group of familiar faces, ones I hadn't seen in years. I can't believe it's really you, Laura said, her voice a little too bright, like she was trying too hard to sound enthusiastic. We've been hearing about you for weeks. I always knew you were something special, Sarah. Behind her, a couple of other former classmates nodded along, grinning wide. I couldn't help but roll my eyes internally. Here we go again. We never really got a chance to talk back then, but we always thought you were, destined for something bigger. Brad chimed in, his tone so rehearsed I almost laughed. I mean, you've obviously made it. You must be doing something right. I fought the urge to snap back, to remind them of all the times they'd looked at me like I was a failure. Instead, I gave them a polite smile, letting them continue their little performance. Thanks, I said, keeping my voice neutral. I've been busy, just trying to get things off the ground. You've done more than that, Laura said, a little too much awe in her voice now. We're all really impressed by what you've done. Honestly, after the startup, well, we weren't sure what happened. But now, you've made it big. I let the comment slide. I could feel the fake sincerity in every word they spoke, but I didn't have to engage with it. Not anymore. So, what's next for you? Brad asked, his eyes lighting up like he was suddenly all business. I mean, now that you've got the attention, what's your plan for the company? I glanced at my phone, not really looking for anything. The glow of the screen reflected in my eyes as I considered his question. For a moment, I thought about brushing them off completely, but I realized this was my chance to speak on my terms. To lay out my vision, not just for the company, but for the future. I took a deep breath, setting my drink down on the bar and standing a little straighter. Well, we're focusing on sustainable energy solutions, making clean, affordable energy accessible to everyone. The goal is to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels and make renewable energy the standard. It's going to take time, but we've got some really exciting projects in the works. Their faces shifted, subtly but noticeably, as I spoke. There was no more fake praise, no more condescending smiles. They were listening now, actually processing the words. I could see the wheels turning in their minds, probably realizing that my company wasn't just a lucky break, but a real, legitimate force in the making. You're really serious about this, Laura said, a hint of respect creeping into her voice. I mean, most people would have sold out by now. You're really sticking with it. I nodded, the weight of the words settling into me. I'm not interested in selling out. I want to create something that lasts. I've seen what happens when people rush to cash out. It's short-sighted. I want this company to make a real difference. The shift in the room's energy was subtle but unmistakable. The awe was there, but it wasn't from a place of judgment anymore. They weren't just looking at me as a curiosity anymore. They were genuinely interested. I could feel their questions intensifying, but I didn't need to keep proving myself. I didn't need their approval. I wasn't here for their validation. I had learned that much over the years. What mattered wasn't what they thought of me now. What mattered was what I was building and where it was headed. They asked more questions about the future of energy, about what innovations we were working on. I answered them, laying out the steps we were taking, the changes we were implementing, all without any hesitation. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control, like my words and my work had real weight. But as the conversation moved on, I realized something. I didn't need them to see me as special. I didn't need them to recognize my potential. I had already proven that I could do this on my own. What I had was more than their shallow measures of success. I wasn't looking for their validation anymore. I could feel a smile tugging at the corner of my lips as I wrapped up the conversation. I've got a lot of work to do, I said, a little too quickly, but not out of any desire to escape. It was just the truth. But it's good to know people are paying attention. As I turned to leave, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I didn't need to be the star of their high school memories. I had something real now, something that went far beyond whatever they thought of me. A few weeks had passed since the reunion, and everything had changed, externally, at least. My company was in talks for an IPO, and suddenly, I was everywhere. Headlines, interviews, public events. I was recognized as a leader in the sustainable energy sector. It felt surreal at times, like the last few years of quiet work had been building to this very moment. But despite the growing media attention, I felt more grounded than ever. I wasn't distracted by the buzz anymore. I wasn't focused on being celebrated or admired. I had one goal: to make real, lasting change. All the external noise was just that, noise. I knew the difference now between people's perceptions and what actually mattered. I sat at my desk one afternoon, scrolling through an article about my company's upcoming IPO. The glowing words, the assumptions about my journey, how it all seemed to make sense in a tidy little narrative. It was strange how easy it was for people to forget that this success hadn't come with easy choices, quick wins, or public applause. It had come from long nights, setbacks, and a refusal to give up. I'd gotten better at ignoring the applause, at blocking out the expectations others tried to project onto me. I had learned, the hard way, that success wasn't measured by how quickly you rose or how loudly people cheered for you. It was about the impact you made when you got there. On a whim, I decided to drive to my old high school. The school looked almost exactly as I remembered. Dull gray walls, the same cracked pavement in the parking lot, the old marquee where they used to announce pep rallies and bake sales. Standing there, I was hit by a wave of nostalgia and something else, gratitude maybe. I wasn't the same person who'd walked out of those doors after graduation. Back then, I had been filled with uncertainty, driven by ambition but unsure of how to turn it into anything tangible. I was terrified of failure, afraid of what people might think if I couldn't make it. But now, I wasn't afraid anymore. I stood at the edge of the parking lot, staring at the entrance, remembering the people who had doubted me, who had whispered behind my back when my first startup fell apart. Their judgments had felt like they defined me back then, but now I could see them for what they were: superficial, shallow expectations that had nothing to do with the person I'd become. I smiled, a real smile, feeling the weight of everything I'd accomplished settle comfortably on my shoulders. I had built something meaningful, not just a company, but a solution that could help people, that could change lives. And as I stood there, looking at the school I'd once wanted to escape, I realized something. I'd already achieved far more than I'd ever imagined when I was stuck in those classrooms, struggling to find my place. I wasn't waiting for their approval anymore. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. The success I'd built was mine, and it wasn't about who had seen it coming or who hadn't. I turned away from the building, feeling the breeze on my face, my heart lighter than it had ever been. I wasn't done yet. In fact, I was just getting started.